Hey everybody. As always, it's second last Wednesday of the month, so time for the CQ Meetup. Today we have Cedric Husler. He's the product manager of CQ, talking with us, for us, right? He's going to talk about the future of 5.6.
It's the Swedes.
It's the Swedes.
It's the Swedes. I'm telling you.
Yeah, we're kind of starting. So my voice is not loud enough. But we're kind of starting, right? So.
We're starting. Hello. We're gonna start.
We're starting. Well, he doesn't speak English that well, right? So anyhow, as Cedric is going to present. He's the product manager of. A product formerly known as CQ.
It's the other way around.
What we always do in the beginning, do we have new people? All right, but why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Let's start over here.
Sure, Lloyd Dolan. Work for Gaston in Tamworth at Life Tech on the CQ, and I'm transitioning right now. Have a few offers, so we decided in a few days.
Okay.
My name is Tiffany Wong. I'm a CQ dev about 3 years now at Acuity Group, but currently on the Capital client. So here I am.
Cool.
Mike Chapman, I'm a developer at Capital Group. Got introduced to CQ5 a year and a half ago. Been working on it since then.
How do you like it?
He has to say yes. He has to say
good. Earmuffs, John. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm Roy Fielding. I'm senior principal scientist at Adobe and formerly the chief scientist at Day. And I live in Tustin, so here.
And don't you use yourself. I'm Roy. I invented the internet. You don't do that.
Well, and then I think Giancarlo has an announcement because his company is sponsoring something tonight.
I brought some. I don't know if they're useful. I brought some giveaways along, so please feel free to take them.
We might want to explain what they are.
Those are. It took me about 6 months to figure out what it is.
So I'm sure you get 5 seconds to
your
explain.
phone, you plug in, right? So the idea is the plug goes through here, and you can hang this on the plug and then charge your phone there. So it's very close to the plug. And I think it's more for women because they don't like.
No. That's a real problem. The cable's not long enough, so your phone hangs down like this.
Yep.
So you can have your phone like this instead of hanging down.
Okay.
How are they useful?
Yeah.
For the Europeans plug, they're not on the bottom of the thing. They're up there.
All right, and with that, I'll give over the word to Cedric, and
All right.
let's see what he has to tell us.
Sure. So thank you for inviting me. For those who don't know me, I'm Cedric. I'm one of the product managers basically. We basically say Adobe CQ currently called Experience Manager. Because the only thing constant is CQ and the rest is changing every year. So you can kind of turn it around. Nobody in marketing just heard that because they would kill me doing it, but it doesn't matter. I'm specifically focusing on the web content management part of CQ. We have quite a few product managers that are looking at digital asset management, social, but I should be able to talk about all the things here. So I don't want to, I don't even have slides. I just put that one up so you guys think I have slides, but I don't have any slides. I haven't even prepared anything. I'm just going to talk, and you guys can, obviously, because it's a meetup, it's not me presenting, so if you guys have questions, you want to know stuff, that's probably a good opportunity to kind of jump in and ask. What I wanted to do, basically what I was talking to Ruben about, is certainly, 5.6, so our last release came out in February. And since then, some people have been playing around with it, got some feedback, and I just wanted to make sure that kind of everybody is kind of up to speed of what are the new things in 5.6. Certainly, I have everything installed here, so I can give you guys some demos to dig into some of the features. I think we're probably going to roughly do 45 minutes talking, so then we can see how long more if you want to. At some point in as soon as you guys start all leaving, I know I have to stop talking. So. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
do have a monologue like, for hours. Some people like it, others don't.
Then I guess it's
So we had a presentation about 5.6 a while back,
Okay.
although not everybody was here then. And
So yeah, I'm not going to go into all details of 5.6. Certainly what I would certainly also talk about some of the roadmap things,
that would be
to
great.
give you an understanding of where we're heading. So a lot of the and as you know, we're just maybe generally start with that. We release every year, Q1, big new release, and we've been doing this since basically CQ5 came out originally, which was kind of like around October 2008, and then basically we've been shipping throughout. And right now we're obviously 5.6, which means we've so far released 6 versions of CQ5. And for those who've been around for a little bit longer, they know we had like CQ4 before, and CQ3 and CQ2, and we're basically kind of preparing for. Usually the time frame is the years don't count up totally, but we're more or less up for something bigger again, right? So from the timing perspective, you would think people are already asking, when is 6.0 coming out? When is 6.0? So the surprise is 6.0 is it's not a surprise, but it's gonna come out next year. But 5.6 already contains a lot of the stuff. So basically, compared to the last few releases between CQ2, CQ3, CQ4, we're kind of like all the big changes that we're going to bring in that, it's what we call the next generation. It's actually already in the platform. We already have been, over the last few releases, been transforming a few things. And I actually want to take the time to explain those differences. It's not basically, if you look at the marketing feature list, you won't see those things in there because they're not necessarily new functions, but there's the way that we change the architecture in order to enable new things down the road in the future. And so that's what I want to basically kind of focusing on. Good. We have as I mentioned, last release was 5.6.0 in February. The next release is actually a little bit of a special release. It's going to come out in a few weeks from now. It's 5.6.1, and that's basically just it has an enhancement across the board, but it does introduce some of the architectural changes that we're working on towards our big release next year, where we are already adding some of those components, not for production use, but in order to work with specific customers to validate some of those points. Certainly one of the things is the user interface that I want to talk about. The other things is some of the platform changes, the way we re-platform the repository, the way we're going to enable some of the new deployment scenarios, which will allow different scaling and different other things that we have in the platform. Good. When maybe just across the board, I mean, most of you guys are probably either developers or you probably have been working with the product for a while. So let me know at any point in time if I just start to mention all kinds of weird names and you guys are like, what is this dude talking about? Stop me so I can go and explain those things. Just sometimes because I'm doing this all day internally, and we were explaining the way our architecture works, and if that should go too quick, just stop me and say, hey, I don't get this part. So what are you actually talking about? Just because if I'm talking, you guys need a lot of imagination of what I'm actually talking about. So that's why I'm certainly trying to show some of the things. Good. Let me just. While I was mentioning 5.6.1, just briefly, it was text slides. You probably won't be able to read it, but it's actually for me, so I know. One thing that you see throughout the last few years is with the Adobe acquisition, there's a few major things that happen, and just make sure you guys understand. Obviously, Day Software and its product, we had a roadmap in a sense of we were very much focused as being a standalone vendor and trying to be as open with all the platform with all the other vendors as possible. It's not that we are changing this, but we basically almost have like a preferred integration partner for a lot of the stuff, which is the other Adobe products. So basically, suddenly there's like a whole slew of products that we have to integrate that are on our list, which are our own products within our own company. So basically, with every release, some of the highlights are sort of like integration with other Adobe products, because obviously that's the bigger value that we can provide you guys, given that we ship a product that integrates with whatever product there is. I mean, being a better understanding how a Photoshop file can be taken apart in layers in order to reuse some of the content, or dissecting an InDesign file within our product in order to extract the content, or being this on the more creative side, or being able to have an integration into Site Catalyst from the tracking perspective without hacking too much JavaScript. So there's these things that we've been building. So that's one theme that you see across. I mean, I think we started with 5.4 very little, because it was 2 months after the acquisition, so couldn't really do much. But 5.5 was a lot integration with on the Adobe side, and with 5.6 we really added a lot more integrations, and also 5.6.1 is going to add another one which was missing so far. There's another product called Audience Manager, and the goal of the Audience Manager is that you can basically get information about your visitors from ad networks. So it's the stuff that people are either worried about because it's creepy, or they like it because they get good content. So it kind of goes two ways. It's basically ad networks obviously have all their ad things going out there. So basically you track people by ads. So basically ad networks need that information in order to serve good ads, right? And what we basically can do on the Audience Manager side, we can be almost like an ad. Like the whole website is almost like is part of an ad server, so we can get all this information from the ad server, and you can do personalization based on that. That's basically the integration that we've built. Something very interesting for media companies that get a broad set of users to their website and want to make sure that they tailor their content based on that. Usually it works also for B2C. B2B is not so interesting. I mean, it's always when you really have a broad audience and you want to try to understand, without these people necessarily having to create an account. Like on the B2B side, you usually have an account, you have some activity of that customer, you have a CRM data. That's much more valuable to use for personalization than use any kind of third-party information that you might get. Obviously, the most famous one of those is the DoubleClick network from Google, which collects a huge amount of data of visitors that are going around the internet, and you can tap into those information in order to kind of do some personalization. That's Audience Manager. So the other, given talking about big focus points in our roadmap, generally, it's not just one release. It's basically throughout all the releases. Is besides what I mentioned, the Adobe integration, is what is Adobe asking from us? What is Adobe? What had Adobe asked us to do, with the product when they acquired us? And obviously, one of the things is that Adobe has no digital asset management tool, or no really good one. So basically, if you go to Adobe, you can create all this. You can buy all these tools like InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, and all the other tools. But what is missing is where am I going to store all those assets? Where am I going to manage all those assets? There was something like Version Q, which was years ago, which isn't really going anywhere. And then there are other attempts, but there's no really good. I mean, there's Creative Cloud, which is nothing else. It's a little bit of a Dropbox thingy, but it's not. It doesn't really do all these things that you want to do as a company when you manage your assets. So for us, digital asset management as an idea, and without actually thinking about content management, just digital asset management on its own has become an focus area for us. So there's a lot of investment on the engineering side. So, teams that basically has been solely focusing on this for now, almost a year now. So 5.6 already saw some of the stuff, but there's going to be a lot more down the road when it comes to really delivering a digital asset management tool that is without the CMS, without website publishing, nothing, just digital asset management on its own to manage assets. So that's a big focus for us, and that obviously means that we need new user interfaces because our current DAM UI is not really. It was very good because it was designed to be a DAM for a WCM, right? A lot of the use cases that you see now DAM are very much tailored because it's part of a WCM. It's an advanced media library. Right, basically that's what our DAM was or is in 5.5, and now what you're going to see is we're going to kind of not move away from that use case. That's obviously very important, but we're going to add a lot of functionality which you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I use this feature in the web? Well, you don't need it for the web, but you might need it for print. You might need it for other purposes that are digital asset management use cases, which are totally unrelated to the web. Right, so that's what you going to see. So stuff like we added what we call metadata ingestion templates. So basically those, it's a big retailer has like photo studios in Asia. So they're doing all these photo shots, the high quality photo stills for all the products that they have in their product catalog. You want to manage all those product catalog images, and they necessarily don't show up on the web in the first place. They will at some point eventually, but not in the first place. So you want to manage all those things, you want to distribute them around the world, and these are the kind of challenges that we're trying to solve on the digital asset management side. So mass tagging or mass imports of assets, and then having almost like a kind of like a lightbox tool where you see all the assets. You can say, I want to keep this, throw away those. So basically sorting out images, managing them, say which one you want to keep. And then there's always the thing between, in digital asset management productions, there's the company who owns the product, who sells the product, like the retailer. But all the work, taking all those photographs or sorting out those photographs, these are all agencies. It's always like, it's not like, these are employees doing these things. So there's a lot of things going on between companies. People need access to stuff. So that's why you basically need web-based user interfaces so everybody can access the stuff. And so there's a lot of work from the use case perspective to support this. Some person gets access for 2 months to work on those assets, and afterwards he doesn't have the permissions anymore. So the whole permissioning, sharing, on the fly sharing stuff is getting more important. So the user interfaces that you see us doing is a lot more like, you've got the share button. The share button, you can invite people that already have accounts or new accounts, and then they get access to the stuff, and they can work on that. And then if you remove sharing, they don't get access to it anymore. But a lot of these kind of use cases that you see us doing. Another part, and that's not so Adobe driven, I would say. That's more just generally a thing that we've been doing is on the social front. So with social, just to make sure that you guys are understanding, there's basically at Adobe we're split between two different things when it comes to social, owned and earned. Now let me explain those two things in case you can follow the semantic difference between earned and owned. And basically, earned is any social interaction that your company do in places that you do not own. Basically, it's on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest, or whatever platform out there. There are people talking about you, and you basically might create your Facebook page, so you can basically, kind of earn the ownership of those parts in those foreign social networks which you do not own. And owned is obviously the opposite. It's basically what's happening on your own properties. It's happening on your own website. It's happening in your own, like you set up a community on your own servers or whatever. I mean, you own the space. You own the URL, basically. The question is that between earned and owned is basically the URL up there. Is it your domain or is it somebody else's domain, right? Or do you control what's going on or not? And so when it comes to earned, basically anything that's happening out there, which you obviously there's a few things that you have to listen, you have to be able to have conversations with those people that are out there who haven't, let's say, tweeting about you or writing, sharing stuff on Facebook or pinning things on Pinterest, and you want to do analytics on that stuff. So that's basically it's basically the product Adobe Social, which is part of the Marketing Cloud, but that's basically what this product is dealing with. On the CQ side, we are very much focusing on the use cases for owned, so everything which happens on your own website, because that's most likely going to run on CQ. So it basically they're all already coming to your website. So it's kind of similar things. You want to do moderation, you want to do all these things, but on your own website. And so we've been extending and basically just creating a lot of new components to create those social experiences on your own website. Obviously, you can use Facebook Connect, or you can log in with your Facebook login on your own website. But that still makes it owned, even though your profile, your identity might be something that is from Facebook or something. So one thing that we've been working, and you will see that hopefully soonish. We Adobe, we basically operate quite big forums. They're actually all hosted by Jive. I can say that, and obviously that should change. So it's a big driver there. Obviously, with those other customers Giancarlo was happy to spend quite some time with another customer where we basically, which was also driving a lot of the requirements for the new social features that we've added in 5.6 in order to create communities and have those communities on your own website being brought out. So let me just, with that I basically want to kind of stop on that list. But another big driver, and this is something that we don't literally do a lot of marketing on, but another big driver for our roadmap is our base platform. Basically, we used to call it CRX, right? And so we basically introduced a new term with 5.5, which is actually an internal term, not supposed to be used outside, but it kind of like obviously Java classes have it in there, and bundle names have it in there, and everywhere it's called Granite. So you might have seen it somewhere popping up, and if you look at all the bundles that are deployed as in code or whatever error messages, you suddenly see Granite showing up, as in the stone Granite. And Granite is basically a kind of new name for anything which is basically the platform or CQ. So let me just draw this very quickly. You guys see that's going to show up. So basically, if you split CQ in two parts, we basically split between what we call the app. Basically, CQ as an application. Basically, and then you basically have the platform underneath. It was before like this. I mean, you basically start CRX, and in CRX you deploy an application, and the application is CQ. And obviously, inside that application, your website is running. Right? I mean, all your components and everything, all your code runs inside that app, which is obviously part of that platform. And basically, we renamed this thing to Granite because in the meantime, it's not just a repository. So CRX is basically a repository for this web framework. Now it's a lot more. So basically, we moved, and basically the last few releases with 5.4, we started that a little, and 5.5 was the first big release with Granite in there. We basically moved stuff from here, which was in here, we moved it down here.
Can you make a couple examples?
Yeah, so workflow engine has been moved down here. Replication has been moved down here. Other parts that are basically generic are moving down here. And the reason for that is, and why I'm mentioning this, you guys kind of explain, is because this part here is used for other things than just to run this CQ app. So there are other products at Adobe that are basically built on top of that platform without actually using the CQ app, the WCM and DAM application that are running on top of it. So a lot of the requirements that we've got from within is basically to build this application. That was also one of the reasons why actually we got acquired in the first place. Because obviously they were interested in the CMS application that we have, because it's a good business to be in, but they were also very interested in the application platform that we have down there, which are actually most of the stuff that is down here is open source. It's Apache projects, Jackrabbit, Sling, Felix, Lucene. I mean, all these things that are down in that platform, they're open source because we think that's great because it's transparent. You guys know what we're doing, keeps us honest, and you guys can participate in it even if you want to. And now we're moving more of the parts down there in order to make sure that this platform gets rock solid. And there's obviously a whole roadmap for that platform itself, which I'll be talking about, of one of the things that we're changing down the road, because there's some big changes coming down here. But the cool thing is we have basically this JCR layer which kind of abstracts what's going on down here, right? So you guys basically when you go to the lowest level on the CQ side and you want to develop something, the lowest API you possibly can go is the JCR API. Obviously we create some higher level API like WCM, DAM, workflow APIs that are higher level, but the lowest you can go is JCR. But everything underneath, you guys don't really know what we're doing. You don't have to, right? I mean, you can go into Jackrabbit source code and you see what we're doing, right? But and the cool thing now is we can basically replace parts of the stuff here and say, okay, this one doesn't really do what we want to do in future. Let's just replace that with a new version of this and replace it out. In the new version, we basically bring out a replacement of this. You guys won't notice anything because you're always coding against the same API, and we won't change this one because that one's nailed down. It won't change because it's standard. But the cool thing is we can now go and replace parts and keep the architecture fresh. Keep it up to date, keep it running with the latest stuff. And one of the, there's obviously a few things that we see that could do and change down the road, and I would love to go into that. And on the other hand, obviously here on top of the API, which hides the fact of all these things underneath here, we have the application, and obviously the CQ application has its own roadmap of things that we want to go forward. But then there's products at Adobe that they're just leveraging this part and just build their own things on top of it. And that's basically like a good reason. And that's why also from the resource perspective, there's a lot more people now working on this than there used to be, given that there's now other teams at Adobe that are using the same platform. So we're going to bring out a new version of Adobe Target, which is today called Test and Target, and it's going to be built on Granite. Or we just launched a product 2 months ago, which is called Adobe Anywhere, which is a video collaboration platform, which also builds on top of that. Nobody will ever know, because we don't market this thing, but it makes Adobe as internally more efficient because we can use the same platform to build apps on top of it much quicker, right? The cool thing, obviously, for you guys is there's a lot more people using this, so the quality goes up. We support more use cases. There's a lot, innovation goes into the platform that down the road, right? So that's and we keep it fresh in the sense of it's not like in a few years from now you're going to look at this thing is like seriously, that basically software gets old if you don't touch it. It's just one of the things. Like if you don't do anything, software gets old, and after like some years, it's not usable anymore, just because you try to run some old software, it just doesn't run anymore. So you always have to keep it fresh. So obviously that's important to make sure that down the road, not just 1 year, 2 years, but much longer, that there's guarantee that this thing is going to be in a good state, and you guys are going to get updates and support new architectures, support new stuff. Good. So let's just, if you might as well just focus on, if that's okay, to focus on the platform here first, and then we can talk about some of the stuff that we're doing here. So obviously that's something that it's I would say certainly exciting in the sense of, given that we've been using this, the quick start, double click, and everything works, but you don't really know what's all the magic in there. And one of the things that we're working towards, and it's actually, if you look at 5.6, the way we shipped it in February, it's actually all already in there, but it's basically disabled because we're basically doing tests with some customers on those features. So basically, in the Granite box that I had before, we basically added variations of code. Basically, there's something called persistence manager, which basically deals with storing the stuff to the disk. So we basically added other implementations of persistence manager into this quick start that you can enable if you know how to. Or there's other implementations for the search engine, like currently we use Lucene. In future, we're going to use Solr, or we're going to offer the way to use Solr and other search engines. So basically, we make already changes in the architecture to do that. And with 5.6, we started rolling this stuff out. And next year, we're going to make it available for everybody. So let me explain to you a few things that we're working on, like the big. There's tons of things going on, but the big items, which I think is gonna change the way we can do things. Mind that when we're adding something new, doesn't mean we remove the other one. Okay, very important. So, but just because we're going to add a new way to install the repository, doesn't necessarily mean the old one goes away. Right. So sometimes it means that it's a mutually exclusive change, but let's say specifically with new stuff that we're adding, it's pluggable in the sense of that. It's not like just because we're going to release a new major release and too bad, sorry, you have to reinstall everything. So it's not like we force you to change your setup. It's basically we're introducing new options first. And maybe down the road we will discontinue some of the options that we had in the past in order to clean up and make sure it's getting leaner and we don't have to maintain all those variations. But it's not something that we just do all on the fly. So one of the things that you might know is basically if you install today a CQ and CRX or a quick start, it's very compact, which is great. But there's the problem that you can't really split one from the other. You can't split the CQ application from the repository. Right? So it always comes together as a bundle. And if you want to do some clustering or so, you basically have to have another one of those instances, and then they start talking to each other. But you can't really, you could do some shared file system in between, but it's not really So basically, they always come as a bundle. So one of the things that we, one of the use cases that we think, okay, what happens if this thing here below does not fit into one computer anymore? Right? If the size of this thing here is bigger than the instance that it's running on, right? So this is something, a use case that is, there's a concept like sharding and other things, but how can we break out of this limitation here, right? And one of the things that we're going to support is basically that you can detach this thing. So basically you can have this one running up here. So this is the line here is always JCR. Just mind that that's basically your compatibility layer. Your investment up here, always safe. We're messing down here. So basically we can detach this here and can run this somewhere else. Right? So now, and the other thing that comes with this change, obviously, if you make it detachable, we have to be able to support that two instances can connect to the same one. Right? I mean, it's a simple architecture. You know that from like databases back in the days. You have your SQL server, and then you have like your JDBC or ODBC connection, 1, 2, same database. Right? I mean, it's not rocket science here, but it's obviously for us it's quite special because this is obviously not SQL and this is not JDBC. This is our own stuff here. And the requirements are also different in the sense of that what we want to support here. Now, the way that's going to work is that we basically going to allow to detach this and have this running, and there will be different implementations of that one here. And one of them is
sorry, quick. Is that Granite?
Granite is this.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is this? No, the
part you've detached, what is it?
The part that we detach is part of the. It's part of the repository. We now call it. We give it a name. We call it microkernel.
Okay.
It's a little odd, but we call this thing.
Okay.
We call this thing MK, microkernel. And the stuff that we used to have, it was called PM, persistent management. Now we call it microkernel, just because the API here is a little different.
Okay.
And then there's different implementations of those. And one of the implementations is for like MongoDB or other. So basically, we can leverage other storage systems than just files that we do with tar files or so. But we also will be supporting tar files. So obviously, we will allow to use technologies here that you can break all. That's basically the use case. And I said, what's happening if this one is breaking the limit here? You can basically now split up physically. In this case, if these are physical boxes, you can have an implementation that splits your repository in 3 physical boxes. And although this instance connecting to like a virtual, I mean, this virtually looks like one. Physically, it's broken down in physical boxes. So. And the goal, obviously, of this one is, let's say today you have a repository size. I mean, not the binaries. The binaries make the bulk of it, right? But let's say the actual tar files, the one where we have the node and the properties. You maybe reach like 2 gigabytes, or maybe you read even. I mean, 2 gigabytes is already quite big if you have nodes. But I know customers that definitely go beyond that from the size perspective when it comes to nodes. And then at some point you're going to reach that level that you want to have to be able to distribute that, not just from the perspective of distributing because it's not big enough, because also for high availability you want to basically distribute those things.
So is this all basically Oak? Because it's at the microkernel from Oak?
Yes.
Okay.
So Oak is part of Granite. So Oak is just a project that, just mentioning another word, I mean, Oak is our open source. It's the name of the open source project that implements the microkernel.
Is it going to be like? Is there going to be an implementation that's just Adobe, kind of like the tar PM? It's not part of Jackrabbit, or is it?
Good question. I think right now we're having everything open source. We don't really.
Okay.
I don't think we have any interest in keeping the stuff.
No, but before there was, right?
I know. But there was some other interest there to make sure the tar files and everything. But I think in the meantime, if I would have to check, but I think they check it all, changed or.
So there's not 2 different trees that you guys are working on.
Actually, when I compile it myself, when I compile our version with Oak, I basically just go get latest from the Oak tree on Apache one, and I compile it like this. So there's no other special bundle that I have to include if I want to compile it myself.
So, when's Oak going to be available basically as a production ready option? CQ?
We don't know.
It's 0.7 now.
I mean, basically the rollout is like this. I mean, I don't know. I can give you an idea, right?
Yeah.
But the exact date is highly depending on how good we're making progress. And right now it looks okay. It looks good. So our target is that by the end of this year we have the proof that the way we've architected it, that it actually works the way we want to have it, and it looks good like this today. So we can start making production deployments next year, or even this year, early getting testing. But it's highly depending on how good the quality is. And I'm basically explicitly downplaying this. The reason for that is creating a new repository like we do with Oak is a huge exercise. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and software just needs, as software gets old if you don't touch it, and new software needs time to be good. So we just need that time and spend that basically quality time on making it good and making it stable and making sure we know all the ins and outs, and obviously a lot of performance tuning necessary. You usually, I mean, currently it works quite okay. We haven't even done that much performance tuning yet. But so basically without much caching layers or whatever, which you should not introduce before you actually know where the actual problem is, it works actually quite okay. And so now we're in the phase that we're feature complete, which means all features are in the way they're supposed to be. Now we have to start making sure it's fast. So that now you start basically optimizing when you actually know exactly what you need to optimize.
So are you doing load testing on this then?
Yeah, I mean, so the way it's going to roll out, and that's a good point, segue into how we want to. So it's already in 5.6, and it's going to be already in 5.6.1, which means the reason why we put it in there is to first prove that we're backwards compatible in the sense of the same CQ version that runs on that current release, runs on this. So that's basically our proof. That we say, hey, we basically ripped out half the repository down there, but guess what? Everything still works because we didn't change anything in the application on top, right? So everything above JCR doesn't change, actually. So that's kind of the first proof that we have to do so we can ship a new repository without actually changing anything on top of the application. Which kind of proves the point, which also means that your code's going to run. The next thing is, how can we make sure that this one is actually better than the one that we have? And we're working with specific customers that actually have challenges today in our current architecture. And some of the customers, and you might be in the room here, and I don't know about that, but and have been tuning our repository heavily to make sure that it works exactly for them, which means they have maybe a certain amount of imports that they have to do overnight, and it's challenging from the timing perspective to make sure that these writes are all done at the correct time. They maybe have a lot of authors on their instances that makes their author server slow, and in this case it's not the CPU the issue, but the repository being too slow to do these operations. So there's a few reasons why, and which this is going to solve. Or they have a massive big repository, and we picked some of them already from the customer side, and they have. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically do parallel setups. So it's going to be basically it's going to be these customers have to invest some time with us to make sure that validate that. But we're going to do parallel setups and really validate the same use case. So let's say if a customer imports, I don't know, 2 million records overnight and has to do that in a certain fashion. So he knows that in his current architecture, it takes him 2.5 hours to do that. So we're going to set up the same system with, in this case, running Oak or whatever the setup might be the customer wants to choose. And then we're going to validate against the same code and see if it's faster, if we can parallelize things. I mean, one of the limitations that we have in our current architecture is that we have a single-threaded writer. So basically, every write operation that goes into a repository has to basically queue up like this one after the other. This is usually not such big of an issue because writes are pretty quick. But if you have too much stuff going on at the same time, you have all these processes that are waiting for each other because they don't have to wait until they can write down into the repository. The limitation will go away here. You will be able to have concurrent writes happening in the repository, which means for those customers who have that issue that they have too much writes going on and it's too slow right now, we will be able to compare, okay, how's that going on? I mean, if you still have one thread writing into the repository, it's actually not going to be much faster because it's going to be a little faster because we have some other lock there up there in Jackrabbit. But basically, if you're going to install it on your notebook and just double click on a quick start, you're actually not going to notice any difference. You're only going to notice the difference if you really do load testing and have like these. You get into those issues where we actually today this stuff actually breaks or is too slow. Then you will see a difference. Under normal conditions, it's not going to be that big of a change. Right? So we're really solving with this. We're really solving with higher level issues when it comes to scaling and not necessarily like the normal. That's just going to be because you boot up, it's faster, or it starts up faster. None of those things. You're not going to instantly. It's not going to render the pages faster. Usually that's actually pretty okay already. Well, you can do some crazy stuff if you try to read the whole repository while rendering a page, but that's probably silly either way, and that's nothing to do with the repository. Yeah. But that's how you're going to roll this out. And then when we actually do, in fact, have to prove that it's faster and it works the way we suppose it works, then we're going to roll this out. And even, as I mentioned, next year, we're still probably, most setups going to be on let's say, the current setup that we have today. And for those customers who really hit those limits or want to go beyond some of the limits that we have today, that we will recommend to use the new system. And the scope, the way that we designed it, right? I mean, today, the architecture has been designed for a CMS, that is for a company that has maybe a few sites, and these few sites can have millions of pages. That's not a problem, and you might have like maybe 50 to 100 authors running on that, people working on that content. That's all fine, right? That's basically the kind of metrics that we've originally had when we designed this. This new architecture has totally different metrics. This needs to be run thousands of customers on the same instance. This needs to be running like, I don't know, 10,000 people on this. So obviously not on the same CPU because you get CPU problems, but you can distribute that. But the requirements for that new architecture goes way beyond. It's basically really, I mean, we want to ultimately provide CQ as a service. So you can basically just like Amazon, you can sign up and say, I want to have a CQ and here's my CQ. And you can just have it running and redo the whole thing for you in the back end. So it's basically, we basically run one big CQ instance for all our customers. And obviously for this kind of architecture, I mean, it's not tomorrow, right? So don't get too excited about it. Don't hold your breath, you're going to die.
You'll still keep our installations, though, those customers that can't go to services, right? No,
I mean, it's not mean, it doesn't mean that you basically, and it could also be, as basically Adobe, we want to create special applications for certain things that are running on this platform. As I mentioned before, this platform is not just used for CQ, this is used for other things. So we want to create applications that are totally multi-tenant in a sense of they're all the customers running on the same instance. And then we have this kind of like big, massive amount of users that are turning out, like, using the system itself, and we want to be able to use the architecture that we have, the future architecture for doing this. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a CMS. It could be something else, different application. But obviously the CMS will eventually get there too. But it's not our first, because most of our customers today, as you guys know, deploy that on-premise. We have some customers that want to have running this basically in the cloud, if you say so. It's the worst time ever, but it's just running basically it just means somebody else takes care of it. And in order to run that. But I mean, there's totally other, I mean, apart from the repository that I just mentioned, there's totally lots of other challenges that comes with hosting such a big installation for other customers. I mean, one thing is, obviously you can deploy your code into your instance, and you can write any kind of Java code that would bring that server in like 2 minutes and even shorter, no problem at all. And that's just one of the limitations that basically Java has. You cannot, basically we're using Java as a platform. So if you write some code that does crazy stuff that allocates a lot of memory, it's just going to kill that virtual machine. And if one customer is doing that and all other customers are dead afterwards, it's not going to fly. So there's obviously a lot of technology change that we have to do in order to enable this down the road. But that's one of them. Okay, it's not going to solve all of them. Just to make sure that you have us not misunderstood that this is going to be CQ as a service. Oh, it's all done. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, but we have kind of plans for most of the stuff. That's long-term roadmap. Another thing that I was actually trying to set up, and I kind of failed. It's a new feature in 5.6.1. It also has to do with the newer architecture here. It's the ability to set up instances. Basically, here you have your main instance where you have all your authors going on, right? These are all the users that are accessing the system, and here's your instance. But let's say if the repository is not the issue, but the CPU is the issue. I mentioned that right before. So basically, the CPU is basically always maxed out because these people are just doing too much. So what do you want to do, right? Obviously, you can set up a second one. You can start distributing that. That's one way. One thing that we thought would be wise is instead of distributing this, trying to put some of the stuff that needs CPU and can be moved somewhere else to basically move that, just really distribute this. So in 5.6.1, we have a new feature called offloading. And it's actually the way it's implemented is pretty cool. It's like Sling, it's in Sling, it's a distributed task. So basically you say a task, you can say you're distributable, and then basically you can set up instances. They do nothing, they just sleep. There's no user ever going to connect into those. But they're basically connected to that server, and they can say they can advertise their service. They can say I can do DAM, I can render assets, I can do replication, I can do extracting data from SAP or whatever it might be. I can do something that needs a lot of CPU or is heavy work, but I have no users and I have time to do that. So this instance obviously gets all the traffic. Is busy and because hey, well, I have like this 100 images that just uploaded. Who's going to do my thumbnails? So you can basically distribute this task over here. All the work is happening over here. As soon as it's done, it comes back. And with that, obviously, you can start distributing things away from that. So this says the CPU and memory that is here can basically be leveraged for users that are actually accessing it, and everything which is basically offloadable in a sense of is not respond. The user doesn't need direct, basically the request comes in, it doesn't necessarily have to be instantly reply for that. Basically, if you upload an image, it's okay if you have to wait a few seconds or even half a minute until all your video renditions are kind of regenerated or whatever it might be. In this case, we can offload that and come back in. So that's also one of the architectural changes that we have been put in place. That's something that we introduced with 5.6.1 for DAM assets.
But it's a full-blown instance.
It's a full-blown instance, not just normal instance. Yeah, I was trying to set that up here, but it wasn't really working. Somehow the replication. So basically, it's kind of fun. You can basically have like instances running everywhere. You can connect them. And then there's a new tool which you see all the instances that are running, and then you say, okay, you can do this, you can do that, you can remote, and then there's a new distributed handler that basically says. That basically keeps a list between all those instances of what they're responsible for, and if a job task comes in, it comes in a queue, and it says, oh, it's distributable, and then see what kind of task are you, like who can do that, and then it either gets distributed to one of those, or if you do it yourself, you can just do it yourself.
How is that licensing-wise? Is that the full license cost for a sleeping instance?
Yeah, I mean we're. Don't ask me about that. Ask yourselves personally, please. I create technology.
Is the offloading available both at the application tier and also at the Granite tier, or is it just on the Granite side?
So, I mean, the feature has been added in Granite.
Okay.
So basically, it's a platform feature that is actually part of Sling and distributed Sling
right.
elements. Like you can, yeah. I mean, it's all part of the. It's actually open source, and you can look it up in this link. You can see all the code changes that we've just done in the last few months on that subject. But we basically implemented now workflow tasks that are leveraging this feature. Right? I mean, in this case, it's kind of cool that you can basically build your own tasks that can be distributed, right? Apart from this stuff, we're obviously going to leverage this in the product out of the box if you want to use it. But on the other hand, there's also going to be
And how is that? Is code for the task has to be deployed on each instance, or is it?
Right now, at this point in time, you have this instance needs to basically this instance advertises its service. That's what we call a topic. But this instance basically says, I can do this topic. I can deal with this. So it needs to have the code in order to do it. So in this case, it sends over the content, and the task, so the workflow task needs to be able to be executable here. This is something that we look forward to do in the future. Is basically in order to have those instances really kind of like almost white labeled. They don't know anything, and you can send a topic with the code that needs to be executed. So basically, you send the payload with the content and the code to execute the task to another instance, and then it executes the task and comes back. That's us thinking about highly distributed setups in future, but that's not implemented. I'm not sure if we actually can get it to work, but that's a different story. It's a good idea. I mean, the idea obviously here is more we think in our own. How are we going to set up this instance that supports 1,000 customers, right? So we're going to set up. I don't know, 50 of those machines, and every customer is going to be shared among all customers. So, and and customers can deploy their own tasks. We don't want to deploy all task codes into all these services, right? So basically, if you create a new distributed task, you upload it to our cloud, and you want to distribute that, so we want to basically need to send a payload with the code to execute that to that instance, so you can execute it and then come back. All right, so much for architectural changes. Yeah.
Cool, actually.
Yeah.
We work within a secure network environment, so how would the instances work for us in that configuration?
So they basically they can be either on the same data center, just close by to each other. So this thing is just, I mean, this is just network connectivity between the two, similar like you have between an author and a publish with replication today. So in this case, you literally have to have, it's a two-way communication, so it doesn't work similar. I mean, replication can deal with one way, right? You can basically deploy from author to publish, and the publish does not need to see the author, right? That's obviously a use case because the publish server usually is somewhere securely different than the author server. Here in this case, they do actually have to see each other because they're constantly checking if they're around. So there's some protocol that checks if these servers are around, because you can basically then, if you do maintenance, you can just pull some of the 3 servers down, and then if you figure, oh, those servers are currently not here, so I'm not going to send them any tasks, and if they come back, they rejoin the network. So it's more like a flexible thing that they're pulling each other, at least in, I don't know what the interval is, but to keep each other to know what there's on. So I think it's designed to be in the same data center, same network. That will make sense. Yeah, not necessarily.
No, I
yeah, I mean, and it's the same code, right? I mean, this it's just another CQ instance that's running, so it should not be that difficult to kind of deploy. I mean, if you manage to deploy this one, you can deploy that one too. Right, so it's not like it's different software, different stuff that you have to deploy, and then again certify or whatever the process is internally to get the stuff up and running in servers. So it's the same software that's running. Yeah, that's also why we don't want to have like different quick start just for this, and then you know, like, oh my god, different quick start, and then you have to go through the whole certification or whatever the process is internally.
It's not code for it. It's our challenge. It's infrastructure.
Yeah, obviously you need hardware, right? That's the other thing. No, well, if you don't have a server yet, that's obviously then it's not. There's nothing I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, Adobe's bang racks, but so.
No, I mean, good. So that's so much for so some of the platform things that we're working on. Obviously, I think super exciting. I mean, as I mentioned, it's all below the JCR fold, so a lot of the stuff you guys won't even notify. Obviously, here with this feature, you will see a difference because you've got new options. You basically can create your own workflow tasks that are distributable. So that's going to be an exciting feature. We'll see what customers are going to come up with that and what they're going to create to offload the stuff. It's basically a cheap cluster, right? So basically, because clustering is hard. I mean, real clustering is really hard. And that's basically just a much more, it's basically a cheaper way to do distribution of load to solve the actual problem, and that's why we basically have to come up with that idea, because real load distribution and having given that we're trying to make sure that everything's stateless, but as soon as you have a cluster and people can jump from one request to the other to another server, it's always challenging. I mean, at least that's obviously much simpler to do. You have a question?
I was just curious how this thing is actually implemented. Is it based on Sling eventing?
Yeah. Yes. Good. So now let's. I don't know if you guys have topics or something on the platform. Otherwise, I would go to. I don't know what the time is. I told you guys have to stop me.
You guys are okay to continue, right? And he can talk for hours.
Show us the app.
Okay. So on the app side, one of the big changes that we're doing is and I was just talking to some of the folks here on the Capital Group about this, is our user interface change that we're doing. It's it's in this case it's controversial because it's a big change, and you might have. Let me see if I can get it to run. I mean, the big change is basically that we're anticipating. Let me just make sure. Yeah, here we go. That we're anticipating that in a few years from now. Oh yeah, thank you. Basically, I think 2014 is probably or 15, if you're a little bit more pessimistic, but that this thing is not just used to play Angry Birds, but to actually work.
It's ridiculous.
And not actually because people are actually going to work on this, just because the technology that is in here is going to go here. Right? I mean, you see that with Mac OS. Every Mac OS version gets all the iOS features. That's just because Apple has no ideas anymore. They just ran out of them. But Microsoft actually was a little clever to create Windows 8, which at least, well, half-baked at least right now, but basically to bring in this idea of using touch to work on a desktop computer. You still have the normal keyboard, right? That's the big problem with this one. You don't have a keyboard, and without the keyboard, it's just not productive. Although you're yeah, exactly. There's a workaround for everything, but I think the combination of having a notebook, which is powerful enough and has all these things, but still using the finger touch to basically be efficient. I think the combination of both is pretty. I mean, for all those who just go to any of those Microsoft stores and just play around with those things, it's really. And if you start working with this, you kind of see suddenly this difference. Like, hey, there is this enhanced efficiency you think you can gain out of having the combination of both. And we think that this is going to. I mean, this is going to roll slowly, not like from one day to the other. It's going to go into not just at home to play, but it's going to go into the enterprise. So enterprise will deploy. Obviously, it always takes some years. So people are still using XP, which is like 8 years old, or even more. I don't know how old it is. But and it's going to slowly move there, and people are going to probably go to Windows 7 now, and then maybe to Windows 8 at some point, or maybe Mac OS. I don't know. Will support touch on the desktop. I don't know what's going to happen. Or these devices actually get, the iPad gets a lot better, or generally other tablets get much better. Which means people are going to expect from a software that it can be used with a finger. That's basically the point that I want to make it come across. So at some point, and it's not this year, but probably next year, year after that, people are going to ask, look at software and say, oh, should I buy this software? And they said, well, can I use it with my finger? And then they said, no, you can't. And I was like, wow, really? You're gonna be that. Like, remember this, right? So I'm gonna come in 2 years and you're gonna tell me, like, oh, totally, remember this. I told you that. So, so basically, it's as we look with every service you sign up, as more of the B2C side, you can almost kind of expect it to have an app, right? You go to your favorite airline, and then you say, "What? You guys have no app? Seriously? How can I check into my flight?" So obviously, there's a generation of people that expect this, others don't, but I think this is something that you kind of almost see this expectation. And I think the same thing is going to happen also with enterprise software. which is the last one to adopt all these things. Everybody else comes first, but enterprise software comes at the end. But nevertheless, they will at some point. So, and that's the reason why we decided, okay, let's just jump ahead and actually create. Let me just make this a little bigger. What happened? Yeah, that's what we basically came up and said, hey, let's just create a user interface that can be used for both. Can be used with the mouse, obviously, right? The traditional setup, and can be used on a tablet with the touch. And that's basically how we came up with that new user interface. Now, this new user interface that you're seeing right now is the one that we introduced with 5.6. So 5.6 has a first version of that one in there, but it's not used for production yet because we're really starting to roll this out. Now, this user interface here has been designed as part of a big exercise at Adobe. It's not basically the CQ team has said, well, initially it was us to say we need a new user interface, but in the meantime, we're going to bring all our products that are part of the Marketing Cloud. It's going to get this user interface. So SAP Catalyst, Test and Target, all the other products that you have out there, they will all get this user interface throughout the next year. So, obviously, a big effort internally for us, but I think for some tools like this, SAP Catalyst, looking at reports, something that you much rather, like the whole dashboard thingy, the executives want to see dashboards, what's going on. There was a lot more, there we see a lot more requests, obviously, for an app, for an iPad ready or a touch ready application. When it comes to content management, we don't see that much requests yet, but I think down the road it will happen. So the biggest change that we're working on is we're basically, besides from our current user interface that we have, we've in parallel building this new user interface that is going to have the same use cases, at least, and more. So we're going to cover the features that we have in our current user interface in parallel and more. And the reason is why we're not just replacing this. It's obvious, because if we were just from one day to the other, switch from one to the other, you guys are going to say, "You serious or what? I have to train all my users, or what's up with all my customization? And are you guys insane?" Basically, you guys are obviously have done a lot of investments into our platform when it comes to customizing things, teaching people how to use it. So that's why we basically making these things in parallel so that both user interfaces are here. When right now this one is not fully done yet. That's why it's obviously a discussion of when the time is here that this one is done, which is going to be beginning of next year. Then we're going to start off. Can we start talking about, okay, which one do you want to use? Use this one or this one? Now, for our existing customers, the obvious answer is, well, we're going to stick with what we know until we have time to actually move over to that new thing. Now, and this, when we have time, is obviously up to you to decide when you want to do that. And for new customers who get deploy newly, for them it's kind of obvious choice, right? Oh, we're going to pick the new one, so we don't have to teach everybody the old one and then change, right? But this is the challenge with basically doing such a fundamental change. And in this case, the fundamental change is not necessarily, it's basically the way it looks, right? And the way it works. Behind the scenes, it's the same server, the same APIs. We didn't change anything, so all your components are going to work. It's basically it just works differently and it looks differently. So people are going to say, "What? It's all different." And we were trying to basically want to make sure that you guys can implement that on your pace. When you say we're ready, we have the time. So we have the release, which already has both in place. You can basically disable this one, so no one will ever see this, or you can do the opposite, no one will see the other one. Or you can make a mixture between, you can say this user uses this one, the other uses another one. So there's going to be different deployment scenarios down the road. And we're not there yet. But, some of the cool new features, it's what we call, it's basically, obviously, from the technology perspective, interesting. This user interface has, apart from the graphics that you see here, has no other graphics in there. These are all vectors. So these are basically these icons up here you see, all these things, these are all vectors. The cool thing about that, it looks sharp on any device. It doesn't matter what DPI range you have or what retina display or not retina display or whatever. These things are always, so basically you can look on my iPad if you want to. Basically you don't see any pixels. It's like a font, right? It's always sharp, it's vectors. Now this again is no rocket science, but most of the user interfaces today, whenever application you look at, all the icons are little graphics, right? So basically you have to go and replace them with like proper in this case, we created icons that are vectors. And something that obviously it's an investment for the future, given that in the future most devices will have like all kinds of weird. The physical size of the device has nothing to do with the pixels. That's basically what I want to say, right? You basically got this what was that? The Google Chromebook. How's it called? It's called Pixel, I think. Yeah, which has this insane DPI density screen, and any website you look at it on it, it's just crap because everything's so tiny, right? And that's obviously the problem with these kind of like high density screens, and that's obviously something that you can fix because here this user interface has completely been built. There's not one CSS that references to a pixel, but it references to a size that you want to have. So you can basically scroll, you can size the whole user interface to where you want to have it, so it's going to look good, even though you have an insane density on your pixels. Right? There's a lot of things that if you take any website that's been built, I don't know, 5 years ago, they probably have in their CSS all kinds of pixel references, and it's just not going to work. It's not going to look good. And so that's also another investment that we're doing for the future. We want to make sure that this thing is ready for when all these devices with other kind of densities of pixels are actually being used, and not just for geeks, but real people. Gonna use that. Some of the things that like touch. Basically, if you do a long press on it, you basically get this action bar. So you can do, it's almost like the context menu you have on the mouse. And then you can do any kind of actions on the element. If you want to select things, you can, it will work. How you go? It's a little slow, huh? Select things. Oh, the redraw is a little slow here through the connection here. It's actually quite fast in my device. Anyway, so you can select things and then work with that, or you have a list of items. Then it more looks like that. You have a list of items that will work through. And then you can, in this case, well, connections cannot be reshuffled, but sites could be reshuffled. Anyway, but you see, let me show communities. Communities, so you have all the user-generated content that comes in, and you can kind of scroll through. And you see that basically by me scrolling through, there's no paging, it basically just loads more while you scroll. We actually do that with all views. We're not trying to load everything, because it's usually too slow. It's one of the problems that we have in the current user interface. Sometimes we're just trying to load too much stuff, and then the browser almost collapses because he has to deal with this huge structure in the memory. And here we're just trying to really load only the stuff that we see. So in order to avoid this problem, either obviously network issue that if it's remote and other things. And also here you can, if you then have a filter, you can say, okay, where are all my topics? And then the topics that basically have, let's say, if they have been answered, there's no match for that. Obviously, the topics is not certain questions, but let me look for questions that did not get answered yet, and then I can go ahead and just reply to that person or so, and you can work with that. So a lot of the user interface, very much. Yeah. Now. For the developers among you guys to kind of understand what that means for you guys. So first of all, as I mentioned, there's parallel, basically what we have today with XJS based, and basically the user interface which is built on what we call Coral UI. Coral as in coral reef, and not as in the company Coral. Right? Coral UI. And you guys are probably very familiar with this right now. Like you basically creating dialogues, you guys creating your own extension to site admin, and all these things, right? And you might even create your complete own consoles, which is pretty cool. Which is cool because you can really leverage all those framework pieces that we have to create user interface extremely quickly. So first of all, the same use cases are valid for Coral UI in future. So you will be able to create your own consoles, you will be able to extend stuff, you will be able to, so this is the same concept. Now obviously, they're not going to work the same. Right? I mean, they're not going to work the same in the sense of that the way it's built is different, and the way it looks like is different. So there's a lot of things that we do in CQ today that uses XJS, but it's just on a peripheral, basically. Say if you create a component, you have to create a dialog. Dialog, you create this node structure of like the tabs and panels and things. But that's actually, it's declarative, so basically it describes how the dialog should look like. It's not actually any XJS code that you write, but it's basically, it references widgets from XJS. So what we're going to do is we're going to offer, obviously, a way that we bring those over. Basically, for each XJS widget that exists, there's another dependent over here, right? Basically, so there's a one-to-one mapping between all those features that we have. Obviously, because they're common things, like you need to be able to select the path. You need to be able to enter text in a rich text editor. You need to be able to, I mean, these are all those things that we have today in here. So they're going to be all over here. So this is for us kind of easy when it comes to migrating your code over, or actually running it in parallel on the same instance, not even migrating. What am I saying? It's basically, I mean, this is the same content here, so we're not changing anything on the content structure. So the same content can be, the same component can be edited here and here, right? So basically, we're reading the stuff from here and creating a user interface just because we have the same features here, right? Now, that's for anything which is component, dialogues, and stuff like that. Now, what happens if you went ahead and changed stuff in the site admin? Well, that's going to be not so easy because it's obviously part of some XJS stuff. So that's something that we can't really somehow bring over. But one of the promises that still needs to be proven is that this coding things or developing or extending Coral UI or using Coral UI should be substantially easier than XJS. So XJS is very much JavaScript based. Basically, anything you do, you have to create your own JavaScript class. You have to listen to events. I mean, it's very desktop. I mean, this thing was invented when people thought that the web browser at some point will replace the desktop. Well, it will, but it will also work like the desktop, which it won't. So, you know, you're going to have menus. You're going to have like, you know, the whole event thing is like MFC back in '99, right? So this is basically they reinvented this concept of those elements in XJS. Obviously, today we learned with the newer frameworks, you know, if you look at Handlebar, if you look at Bootstrap, and if you look at other JavaScript frameworks that are coming along, you know, the way you work with content and the way you work using JavaScript, it's totally different. It's not a desktop metaphor. It's different. And obviously, this new user interface will follow the more, let's say, newer approaches. They might also be old in 2 years from now, we'll see, but we'll see how long they stick around. It's not really now power, but at least we're basically also leveraging. This is built on jQuery and obviously some of our own extensions in order to do that. So we've tried to make this very developer friendly, and certainly for those people who are very much into JavaScript and using template languages like Handlebar and other stuff, which are basically, you know, you don't actually code in JavaScript user interface. You have a templating language which has all kinds of custom tags, but you use those custom tags to build this user interface. So in this case, it's actually, for us, in the meantime, given that we're developing this product here, obviously we're developing the framework and the product at the same time, which is a little bit challenging, but we actually see that a lot quicker now, even like new teams coming on board and migrating the stuff over into like their product into this framework. We see them creating like user interfaces super quick. And that's basically the goal that we reached. So we want to basically, that you guys can, obviously, again, the same concept, you will be able to overlay things in here, right? You will be able to change how that things look like based on the same patterns that we have actually in our system today. Yeah, so that's so much for big changes there. Another thing, and it's probably the last point that I want to mention, is when it comes to building the component itself. So I was talking about the UI, you know, the dialogue. The other thing is the JSP that is always part of a component. Now today, those JSPs are either look nice because you took care of it, or they look messy because you didn't. And if you look at our components that we ship in the product, you see everything from nice to messy. And the challenge with that is because we basically, the view that is represented in this JSP is very easily, and it's so tempting to just add some more Java code into this thing to make it work the way you want to have it. And at some point, you just have it's such a hairball of Java in that HTML, so you don't really understand what this thing is actually doing. And instead of redoing it, you just add more, right? And obviously we see some of the stuff in our product happen the same way, and we basically came to the conclusion, and I think there's partners here in the room, which actually were innovative and created their own kind of like abstraction layers with some of the stuff that we have in the components to make those components better maintainable over time. And so what's going to happen is we want to bring in some of that innovation that we see that some of the partners have been doing. We want to bring this back into the product. So there's something that you're going to see pretty soon. We're going to start talking about how we want to do that. And it doesn't mean that your components that you coded today won't work anymore. I mean, they still work the same way, right? Basically, what we want to do is we want to get rid of most, if not all, of the Java code inside those JSPs. And the way that's going to work is basically we're going to abstract the common things that you constantly do. I mean, if you look at 1,000 components and what are in there, you always see the same things. People always do code the same things. And it's getting more complex. So basically, why not abstracting some of those things that people constantly do in something like a templating language and abstracting those things away the way that the systems underneath work down the road. And the reason for that is obviously make it quicker to develop new components and make it maintainable down the road, and not be depending on what kinds of Java code.
Reusable.
And reusable, yeah. Well, reusability is can help, can be made. Yeah, well.
Yeah, when you see 17 different sliders, which do basically the same functionality, just different.
Reusability is a much harder problem than writing clean code. Reusability has a lot of things in there, right? And I will not promise that our new framework will have reusability. It will help
encapsulate the functionality from the view layer, then chances are given that
you can leverage that. That's reusability is another challenge. Given that it has with the view has a lot to do with the JavaScript and with the CSS that it has that actually produces the actual final view. And if you then talk about CSS, there's all these frameworks. One has a grid layout, the other one has this, and depending on what you used, you won't be able to mix and match those because they're not. And one of the things and that's maybe something, and that would be good feedback from you guys. We do not want to limit or recommend or whatever what web framework, JavaScript and CSS that you should use. We as a product like CQ or Adobe, we not want to tell you have to build your website with this grid framework, this CSS grid framework that it works for responsive. If we would do that, we could obviously do a lot of things to make it more exchangeable, right? But given that these things change more often than our product names, and that's a lot. So what's the favorite framework of the day or of the week is changing constantly, and you can go around like yesterday it was Bootstrap, today it was something else. It's changed constantly. So we will not dictate which framework from the client side you will use to build your website, because we would lock you into something you don't want to have. Or basically, it looks maybe totally great today, tomorrow it's going to look awful. So that's why it's this exchangeability will come with this. But maybe at some point it's going to be one framework that on the CSS and JavaScript side, people say, hey, yeah, it has been established for a while. But jQuery is probably the only constant right now. That you see everything else is changing constantly. And specifically that with responsive design, there's been a lot of innovation of new frameworks, and that helps you to manage your grid and manage your hide, show features and whatever. And I do not expect this to slow down. It's going to go even faster. And we want to make sure whatever framework you guys want to use, you can use with this concept. So that's why we don't want to mess with your actual view. We just want to mess the way you do produce the code, the actual markup for the output here.
So are you guys looking at CQ slice as one of those layers to remove the Java code from the JSPs?
Yeah. So
slice.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that one of those that you're looking at?
Yeah. So there's been a few. Some of the partners have been basically implementing frameworks that basically abstract exactly some of those things. And we've been looking at some of those implementations in order to find out. Not that we want to copy those. It's your innovation that you guys did out there.
Right.
But we want to basically And that's why we're also working with the partners. It's not just we coming up with something new. In order to basically propose something that not just we agree, but you guys can agree on too, and say, okay, and you guys will still have plenty of opportunity to do innovation on top of that, in order to basically do innovation on top of it with these kind of client-side things in order to make things simpler for customers and accelerate the project even further. What we want to avoid is in the situation that we're unfortunately in right now, that some of the customers have been around for a few years, and not to put any partner here onto a blame, but they basically working with 3 different partners. Every partner had a different concept. Everybody coded on top of each other, and now you have a code base, and if you look at it, it's just like, seriously, what is this thing doing? And we do not want to end our customers in that situation that they look at 3 years, 4 years down the road, they look at their component code and it's like, I don't know what this component is doing. And that's why we want to, and obviously to also make sure that it's simpler to think. So that's one of the challenges that we want to solve. But on top of that, there's still a lot of innovation that comes there. And there's also a security aspect. Today, every component you guys are actually responsible to make sure that cross-site scripting is safe. And that's a huge burden because you have to add that into every component. You have to make sure it's safe. And we want to make sure that this cross-site scripting checks stuff like it's basically part of the underlying layers. You don't have to take care of those anymore. Well, you would take care of those things. So there's other things, other reasons for security purpose or for other things that we want to make sure that they're taken care of in that framework. All right. Any other questions?
Open up the floor for questions.
But yeah, if you guys have more frameworks or something that you want to talk about, then go ahead.
Yeah, because I gave you a presentation last month about workflows, so my question is about workflows. So first thing what I would like to know is, are there any plans to make workflows good? Second thing is...
I love Swiss people there so much.
Yeah, can you explain why there's now a Granite wrapper around the workflow who does more or less nothing than just wrap it? And then especially 5.6, the first version broke the workflow, so you were not backward compatible. You had to upgrade to Granite. So...
Okay, I mean, if we broke backwards compatibility, that's certainly a bug that needs to be fixed. I mean, that's probably not intentional.
Yeah, but why wrap something that looks the same? It's you have the same issue that the metadata, and you have the metadata, and you have the workflow metadata, and then you have the workflow data metadata, and still the same wrapper. Why? Just right.
Yeah, I cannot give you the detail. I'm happy to look this up what they've done. What I know is that we basically moved the engine, moved the workflow engine down into Granite without necessarily changing too much of the workflow engine itself. It's something that we want to do. We want to refactor and change some of the way the workflow engine works down the road. But we first kind of moved it down, and in order that we can. It's just, I assume that's what's done that way. The reason why we basically add extra wrappers is to make sure that we can say, okay, this is the API that we're going to support down the road as backwards compatibility, so we can kind of almost rip the actual implementation away and replace it with another one, but having this wrapper API as a compatibility layer in there. So I know that we have a CQ workflow API, which we have to keep because actually our own application is using it, and your stuff is going to use it too, and that's basically abstract. That was previously directly connected to the workflow engine. Now we kind of disconnected it, we moved it down there, and we moved something else in between in order that this API still works. Now
but more or less what you're doing, you have here the wrapper, and here you have the same API. So you didn't do any improvement. Just, I actually did it. I did my workflows and just changed the name, the package name to Granite. And except the resource collection, everything else worked the same way. No changes in the code. So I'm wondering why, this is like, you put the API down to Granite, and now Granite has to deal with the old stuff as well. which is not very developer friendly.
Well, I mean, this is. I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, we could create a better API, right? But with APIs, it's basically the backwards compatibility is really important for us. I mean, the reason why we probably moved in your eyes the crappy API down there is basically because we had this crappy API for a long time, and we're going to support it. And we're gonna, because there's so much application depending on that, and we will be coming up with a newer API, but it's not here yet. It's not been done yet. We basically should just move the engine down, so it's basically the same API is there on the Granite level. So you can, and that's certainly probably because we have internal customers that are not using the CQ stuff. So basically, they deploy Granite without CQ. They still want to use the workflow engine, so they're going to use it the same way. Maybe it's not. It's the same, so it's not as nice as it could be. But that's basically what we have today. And but I know that we're working on improving the workflow engine. It's probably going to get a new API, but we're going to keep the old one because there's so much applications depending on it.
Yeah, but then you have 3 APIs.
Well,
you
that's
have
what it is.
the old, you have the Granite API, the current, and then you have the new API. So.
Well, the old will move.
Yeah.
It's just prep work to move it down to.
Yeah, but you still have 5.4 workflows in there. You have the CQ legacy wrappers still there. So
of course we have to, because we have people who wrote stuff with it. I mean, if we I mean, that's the investment. That's why we're enterprise software, and we're not. I mean, it's the difference. It's the price that we pay for backwards compatibility. We want to be innovative, so we basically create those API layers in order that we can innovate underneath. But we're going to keep them, and we're probably going to deprecate it at some point. But we're still going to, especially important APIs, even though they're deprecated for a few releases, we don't remove them because we know there are people actually have spent millions building applications on top of those APIs, and we can't remove them, and we also won't. And it actually usually is not even a problem because it's not stopping us from being innovative underneath in providing new APIs. So if you develop something new, you can use a new API. That's fine. So in this case, from the timing perspective, our new API is not ready. So that's why it's not in there. But we want to make sure people can use the workflow engine if they don't use CQ, so we have to bring an API. That's probably the answer.
What kind of documentation are you going to provide for this next release? We're really struggling to find documentation beyond just the dev material that's out there, the data material.
Yeah. Good point. So when it comes to this exercise, right? This is obviously going to be a big exercise for everybody. There's going to be a lot of document. This is not ready yet. There's no. Given that we don't want to have anybody. I mean, we're demoing it, we're showing it, so we can actually. So I can actually tell you the story right now here. So you prepare you guys. Mentally, it's going to happen, and so that's going to be big documentation on that subject.
What about the expected major capabilities? I mean, that's something we're finding. We find all this promise, but we have very little documentation on how to actually execute upon that promise.
Okay, so I would love to know what kind of, I mean, what we usually do is just, I mean, when we bring out a new release, we document the new features. I mean, and what I was talking about today, a lot of the repository changes and all these things, I mean, this is obviously all not documented because it's not here yet. I mean, I talked about roadmap, right? But stuff that we shipped in 5.6, for example, in February, should actually all be documented in a sense of that document how you use it as a user and you use it as a developer. Sometimes, obviously, the developer documentation is initially, unfortunately, usually a little low. But one thing that you guys have to understand, the way our documentation team is basically improving the documentation every single day. It's not like we're just bringing the release out, we push the documentation out, and it's done. So basically, this team that's working on the documentation is basically every day improving the documentation. Obviously, we have stuff going live constantly. We also trying to. We have like a Twitter handle where every time we publish like new big pages, we basically make a tweet. So basically, you guys know, okay, hey, there's a new part of the docs that went live, or something was updated or revisited. So sometimes it takes some time for some of the bigger articles to get updated, actually past the release time frame. But if you have so when it comes to documentation feedback, if you have basically really specific questions that you guys have and you did not find the answer, I would actually be super happy to collect those, because we're collecting those obviously from community discussions that we see, in the forums and everything. We're basically collecting constantly questions that people have, and they don't find answers for that. We really can plug all those holes in our documentation.
So for example, we're trying to find out how to build our MSM, our multi-site manager, and
Okay.
it's almost impossible to find anything on multi-site manager.
Okay.
We're literally in some
Yeah,
cases
there's-
blind on that.
I mean, we have the same discussions, right? Illustrations of people that have done localization, regionalization, you know, and we just figured it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. So basically, we explain how live copy works, but obviously the combination of all those features will make your deployment, and we don't describe how in which order you have to use those 10 features that it actually is going to work for you.
Well, just finding the words multi-site manager, I mean, just describing that product and how to build and implement that product is next to impossible.
Okay.
See, there's a book coming out on Amazon, the first book coming out on Amazon in September. Is there anything that's going to come out that really is on that introductory or that basic, this is our product and this is, you know, how you would build on that product. Yeah.
No, yeah.
It's not there.
Yeah. Okay. Now, MSM is a good point. So I will pick this up. I will see you. I know that we've been improving a lot of parts of the documentation, specifically not just, and that's some of the things that I hear a lot. So basically, we explain how to, as I mentioned, we explain how live copy works, which is the underlying technology that makes multi-site manager possible. But it only explains how a live copy works. But we were spending some this time this morning on some MSM deployment scenarios. Basically, in which order you start applying this is something that our partners obviously know or have done that, but it's if you go into our training, they won't tell you, and if you look into our documentation, you probably won't find it either.
No, what we do find is all in isolation.
Yeah.
There's really.
Yeah. I think what's missing, not to shoot myself
if
in
you
the
know
foot,
how to research, how to search docs.com, you will find everything.
Yeah.
I get answers from Adobe, where I said, where did I find that page? There's no way I'm going to find the page with a regular search, so you learn sort of how to look for these things. And then you find everything.
Yeah,
but
one or two sentences that describe something, and that's about it.
Yeah.
No, I mean MSM is certainly one of the more complex things. Maybe the challenge is because we're calling it multi-site manager, but it's actually there's no feature that is called multi-site manager. So you probably won't find it.
So I think
I can find references to Blueprint, and I can find references to live.
No, I mean I got it. I'll pick this. Actually, pick this.
And the Java docs, if they could maybe write more than just 3 words.
Yeah.
Into because
there's commit hooks for that.
I'm recording this. I need it for my next meeting.
I'll send you a copy.
Just do metrics on the check-ins, right? And don't let check-ins go that have no comments.
Yeah, there was this user manager thing which is deprecated. Use Granite or use the Jackrabbit thing, but you can't get the profile in Jackrabbit because Jackrabbit, of course, has no profile. So there's no Java doc. The classes were missing, so we usually use Java docs or the API to find things, but if it's not there, then you're dead.
That's still on the developer side.
It's like the
middle.
It's like there's all the marketing. There may be details on the developer, but it's like that middle area. How best to?
Huge. Yeah.
I mean,
then send them an email.
It goes into the example like what would be nice would be take a couple of, say, use cases of customers, right, and have the full end-to-end demo of it. Because we have Geometrics Media, right, but we don't have a full end-to-end demo of an installation of a media company. Or we have Geometrics Outdoors, right, but we don't have a full end-to-end with the security, with the dispatcher, with the search implementation or whatever you want, right? That is actually end-to-end, right? And nobody's showing that. So we're trying to do that on CQ Blueprint. It just takes time, right? Because that's kind of what, and I'm not sure whether it's Adobe's job, right? Because that's the product, right? I mean, it's partially, but
they want to sell professional services.
No, I think that's it. That's honestly the conclusion I've come to. That is, the information's not there because we have to.
I was kidding, actually.
Well, it's actually no. I'm not going to say this. It's going to be on record. I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah,
that's why guys like Cedric are coming out. Yeah.
But that's for example the problem in workflow.
Yeah.
In workflow, there's no way to figure out what needs to be done, except you really look at the code.
Like if you want to do
However you
complex
do that,
workflow.
and so, yeah, that's very disheartening to you know to go and more or less break the code in order to figure out what's going on, and the documentation. Many things doesn't explain, and even the examples they have always stop when it gets interesting. So
We can make an example, like for example, packages have an install hook, right? So you can run code if you deploy a package, right? Which you can do nice stuff about. And you see in the Java docs, oh, there's an install hook, right? But there is no documentation about that. And if you use it, then you suddenly learn that if you replicate the package with an install hook, replication cannot support install hooks, right? And you file a bug about it, and it's like, yeah, nobody's using it, so who cares, right? But it's a feature that's there, but it's not, it's A, not documented, and B, not complete. So either feature shouldn't be there, or should be private, or should be...
I mean, we're getting
so,
off. No. There's a few things that I want to mention. I mean, it's good, 2 points, workflow, and we certainly have still, although we worked hard, a big backlog on documentation, things that needs to be done. And it's more, and basically I call it the why question. Basically, our answer, our documentation answers the way stuff works, but it doesn't tell you why you supposed to use this feature. It tells you, this is a great feature. It's like, but why are you supposed to use this? Like, and how I'm supposed to, I mean, how in the sense of it describes to you how the feature works, but the why in the sense of what's the bigger story behind all these things, right?
Or even, I don't know if that's probably not a good marketing, right? But like a void, right? This is meant for this. So workflows, for example,
it's kind of tough to mention what is avoided because
or you put it positive, right? Workflows
people come up with weird things.
For system level
we wouldn't
processes.
Even,
I mean, mostly for, or, give us some kind of clues, right? I mean, even the MSM discussion, oh, well, we never thought of using it that way, right? So this is the way we did it at Adobe, or I don't know, just something.
The problem is you do have really good documentation for the marketing. I mean, you sell our executives and then they expect execution, and we come up with execution that's like hit and miss. Well, we'll try this and see if this works, because that's the only way we can execute. It's crazy. It's man-made.
At our company, executives, to chime in with what Jill was saying, were convinced that by the marketeers that you don't need to have CQ architects on staff, you don't need to have Java developers on staff in order to have this product. You install it, maybe you need the help of a partner just to get it installed, and then it's going to run itself.
They really think you push play.
Yeah, they really do. And it's so much more powerful than that, but it has so many more requirements, not technical requirements, staffing requirements.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that kind of staff, but here we have a room full of experts, many of whom were having problems themselves finding the information. I think that documentation focus could really help the real-world usability of the product significantly.
It just sounds like the marketing team is really good at the job. I don't see the problem.
That's true.
Yeah, but your word of mouth is really going to suffer as a result.
No, I mean,
it's a great product.
And the other thing is just maybe this. So there's certainly the why. I was going to call it the why question, basically, that our documentation covers the place of how do you use that feature and how it's supposed to be used. It's one thing, and the point that you mentioned. So, and that's maybe, I mean, it's kind of comparable. It's maybe our own fault, but our platform has not just 1,000 features; it has millions of features, and we basically create. We basically create those things sometimes for this, and then a lot of, given that some of the parts are open source, there are a lot of extensions that come into Sling. We don't even use them, but they're part of the product, and or they're part of the platform, and then it's going to be, basically in this case, you will find features that we don't, they're in there, but we don't even use them, and there probably won't, you probably also won't find any documentation for it. or this extra, maybe this install hook is probably used during the actual quick start install and when it starts with, and then he has to deploy ACLs on the first startup, so we implement and hook, and then if you use that to get other applications, it doesn't work because we don't happen to use it in that way.
Yeah,
Right? So these are the things, right? So then there's a lot of that in the platform that we have there, which that's basically the difference between the application on top, that is CQ, and then the underlying application, which is a lot powerful and can do all kinds of things. Basically, one of the things that we introduce is we introduce this concept of tenants. So you can basically do tenant management, which basically you can kind of almost split the repository in parts. But CQ doesn't, the application doesn't support that. But that's because somebody else has built an application on the platform that needs tenants, right? So that's sometimes confusing because suddenly features show up in the USGI console and you can manage tenants, and then like, oh, let me try that, see what's working, and then everything's broken. Right?
And also to be fair to Adobe, when it was Day Software, when did you buy it? 3 years ago?
Oh,
2? I mean, who really knew Day Software? And when Adobe put their hands on it, I think the clientele exploded about factor 20 or something.
We double every year.
But all the same, you're talking about templatizing using a templated language. There are redundancies. You know that there are common feature sets and common things that people expect to execute, like MSM, that we just don't have any support for. I know some need to be DIY, but we're so far from it that it becomes extremely frustrating and expensive.
I just have a general comment about documentation. I think it will go a long way if you just like organize it better. It's a bit difficult to find information, even though there is a lot of documentation and a lot of it is there. It's just you just have a site with a lot of links, but it's kind of difficult to navigate sometimes.
Well,
just like go to a specific area and navigate to parts you're interested in. It's difficult to navigate sometimes, and then you try to use the search box, and it's often results in irrelevant information.
Okay.
So like if you're a developer, you might not be interested in the search of the authoring experience or the admin experience, right? So like faceting in the search, things like that, right? Tagging of the documents would help quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically tagging based on audience or possible audience, then being able to filter that.
And really disable the Google chart for timing on the docs page. No, no.
Does it bore you?
No, we have a service that actually tracks the changes in the documentation every day, right? And the pages are not comparable because every time you publish, that lower timing thing throws it off because it's always different.
That's interesting. So you guys build a service that tries to find out what has changed in documentation.
Yeah, we just basically, well, it's just in internal work right now, but we basically might mirror the site like every day and then do a diff of, so this is actually what changed in the site. Right, so because we have to keep up to date as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
because
20 feet is there, but it's not.
No, it's fine. Basically, it's a valid point because that's something that I basically asked the team to do, is to come up with a change list that would help you do that. You guys doing this exercise is obviously, you can do that on your time, but it would not be that hard for us to create a change list of.
We have to clean it up a little bit, and we have a subscription service.
Yeah.
So you internally use JIT. So can't you, and do you use?
No, it's all built in CQ.
Huh?
The documentation is built in CQ.
Right.
Git is code.
Right, but your documentation.
But anyway,
is built?
we have the versions. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not a technical problem, okay?
We
don't have to invent new things here.
We already get another Adobe person to come here after this.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any plans for a larger, like a plugin library, allowing more plugins to be developed for this to extend the functionality of it?
Good point. So we have, the package share, which is working so in a sense of that it's good for us to push stuff out, but it doesn't really work as a community feature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the main points why that is because most of the times you don't actually want to share a finished package. You want to share some code that does something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is finished or something that is in itself working as a package, because having a package that just works in another instance that is transportable, it's a very hard problem. And but what it's totally doable is if you basically have a Java class that implements something, so you want to just share that Java code, somebody else can just pick that one up and just do something else with it. So we're thinking much more of doing something like a GitHub for the community in order to share things. So you basically can have your own project there. You can push your code up there, and you can basically share your code among all other like CQ users, developers, in order to solve common problems. And obviously, we will then be happy to pick some of those basically pull requests and put them into our Git and just put it into the product if it's good enough. So you guys start contributing to make it better. But basically, so that's another way of basically sharing this kind of plugins, right? So basically,
well, I see that on GitHub. There are 25 on GitHub, but I expected with a major enterprise that there would be a lot more than that. And I'm wondering if that's
right now, the thing is, right now the code is all over the place, and that's the challenge, right? They're basically everybody's been sharing this code, but it's not really organized. So we have basically our next version of the package share, which is currently in development, is basically going to combine these things. So we'll be able to. It's basically we're actually using GitHub as the GitHub, and we're going to have like special projects that you can create, which will actually show up inside the package share, and there's going to be a community around that, so people can kind of like share code samples and say, hey, I managed to implement an MSM I don't know, rollout configuration, and so this is the Java class that I used to do that, and then you can start sharing those things, which are not necessarily finished implementations, but things that we can help each other out to kind of find things out. Obviously, we will also. There's a project that we kind of started, and we call it.
You changed already.
No, not the project name. No, actually, project names are pretty stable. No. Whatever. Doesn't.
How about an acronym with like an M in it?
No, there's no acronym. I hate it.
There's A in it.
No, it's no acronym. Anyway,
AEM.
Basically, it's. I mean, I can just look at it. Oh, where I have this? Boilerplate. It's basically the idea is it's boilerplate code and classes for all kind of like common things that you want to customize. Let's say you want to implement your own workflow task, so this is kind of the boilerplate code. Just take this and start from there. Or you want to create your own MSM rollout config. This is the boilerplate code. Or you want to create. So I mean, today you basically have to kind of look up. Basically, what you basically do is back and steal, trying to find another implementation somewhere, and then try to look at how it works, and then rip out the other code and just create your own. So boilerplate code would actually. So I don't want to call it SDK because that sounds like already too much, but it sounds complicated. But boilerplate code is basically copy paste examples for a lot of the common things that you want to do on our platform for extensibility. And that's also something that we want to share through that kind of GitHub thing. So you will basically be able to basically fork those boilerplates, and then you can start working with those things, something like this.
Are you guys interested in buying CQrecipes.com?
CQ what?
Recipes. I started writing a recipes book about a year ago for CQ, and it talks about how to do this, this, and this. I haven't done anything with the domain.
Oh, okay.
So, and the book is in various stages.
You want to sell the domain?
What's that?
You want to sell the domain?
No, I'm just joking. It sounds like what everybody is asking for is like recipes. I'm a developer and I want to do X. I'm an author and I want to do X.
Well, the problem is that they changed their product names.
Yeah, well that's why that's why I also bought AEM recipes too.
You just have to like register all the possible domain names.
You should have bought recipes.com and then just use up the
I think I've already taken.
Yeah.
I've seen recipes on it.
Cool. So, any more questions or?
I have one actually. Is there anything on the roadmap for search in terms of the customer experience that CQ delivers, or is it more just the solar stuff that's going into Oak?
So, so on the search side, we certainly want to make sure that we can. So basically, with search, we have two major things. One is a performance problem that we want to solve that we actually already solved with what we call search collections, which is actually something that's in 5.6. It was before it was a feature pack. So you can create your own indexes for some of the stuff that you want to search through. But that's ours built-in Lucene searches. It's not quick enough for some of the stuff that you want to do. So to make it quicker, we have search collections. Lucene is good, and the problem is why our search is slow is not Lucene's fault. Just to make sure that's clear, not one of it's the way we implemented it, and we basically want to change that also now and Solar obviously brings in more things, the ability also to index external stuff and bring it in, right? Not just have our own content, which is in the repository in the index, but having other content that comes to bring into the mix. So that's something that Solar certainly will help. Makes it much simpler. Other than that, Solar is a lot pluggable. There's a lot of interesting plugins when it comes to like do faceted search and all these other things that currently today we're I would say we're limited. It's just because Lucene is so built into Jackrabbit very strictly, and it has back then it was not thought to be replaceable. It was not thought to be, and that's now obviously in future we want to kind of change this thing so we make it more extensible.
Does Solar rely on the metadata within that you put within the page properties, or is it how does it work?
Well, Solar basically just Solar is basically just it's basically Lucene plus other things. Okay. Technically, it's also an Apache open source project, so same thing. But and it's going to work the same way in the sense of it contains everything from the repository, so everything which is full text index. So if you have a PDF, extract PDF content into the index, all metadata part of the index, everything searchable. So the use case is the same, but there's a few things that today is kind of hard to do. And one thing that I mentioned is if you want to do if you basically have your PIM product information data being imported, right? So you have like all these different searches that you want to do, and you want to do some faceted search based on your data. It's all doable with Lucene, but you have to start writing your analyzers. You have to write your own code in order to do that. And Solar just gives you a lot of basically adds this extra layer around Lucene that enables this functionality to do those things much quicker. So we can create components that will allow you to leverage that functionality. But from the search perspective, it's basically a search engine. So
is Solar coming in with this release, or is that a future?
That's future. That's so we already have customers basically implementing Solar today with CQ, but they basically run the CQ basically the CQ server here and Solar here, and they're just trying to index everything, and then the API calls goes over here, and Lucene is in here. They don't even use Lucene in this case, but that's usually for public facing, like on published server, visitor is searching. I mean, Lucene is mostly used for internal things, so we have a lot of functions within the admin UI is actually using a search engine behind the scenes. You don't see that. Lucene is constantly used for all kinds of things to actually make our product work. So you can't just rip it out, otherwise the product won't work anymore. But with the changes that we do in Oak, we basically made the search engine replaceable. And one of the possible implementations that we have is Solar, because Solar also has another cool feature which makes it distributable, so you can distribute indexes over multiple machines, and similar that we can distribute the repository.
But this approach is not going to fix the kind of public-facing search.
Which one, the Solar?
Your second use case, the one that you crossed out, the customer-facing?
The customer-facing use
well,
case?
That's today, right? So in future, like with Oak, basically Solar will be in here, and then you can also use it. You can basically customize it and do that. I mean, we created today. We created what we call basically this Lucene index in here as part of our platform. We created what we call search collections, which you can basically create new indexes here in the same Lucene that's running in here, which are special purpose indexes for your queries that happens for your visitors. So basically, if your visitors do something like a search based on tags and based on product information that they're all in our index, but to do the query is just super slow because it's not optimized. The index has not been optimized for that query. But if you want to say, well, nah, this needs to be super quick, like, then you basically can create a new index for that specific purpose, and then it's quick.
That's only 5.6 though, right?
That's in 5.6 it's default. It's built in. With 5.5 you have to install a feature pack.
Okay, cool.
Do you get the external solar will be the easier implementation?
Yeah, the external solar obviously. So that's I mean, with this use case, it's still basically just our content. I think one of the major use cases with search engine is hardly in any environment. It's just our content needs to be searched. You always have other content that needs to be searched too, and that other content might be in another system, which is not CQ. Like you have other stuff that you want to make searchable, and right now we don't have a way of indexing content into this. But with this new implementation, we will be allowing like other content to come in and to federated searches over multiple indexes and stuff like that. And Solar has like a whole indexing infrastructure, so basically to go out and crawl stuff and stuff like that.
Cool. No workflow question.
No. Another thing of my pet project. Any plans to deal with ETC mapping?
You meant multi-tenancy, right? ETC mapping would be a candidate for that.
I ran into problems with ETC mapping where as soon as the map gets big, the results are unpredictable and can lead to some weird problems. Because I cannot guarantee you in which orders they are applied.
Oh, okay.
And suddenly,
the resolutions happen.
Yeah, and suddenly I get, for certain pages, I get completely wrong. And it's impossible. I can try to reorder, but because I don't know, there is no way.
So, I mean, I know where you're going to go. So there's the two answers. First of all, there's certainly work that we're doing we call it multi-domain management to basically have the resource resolution be much more nicely split to domains. Right now, basically have one resource resolution map, and if you're happy, you can add some extra domains in there with ETC map and map it to some tree. But it's the resource resolution, basically, you know, like vanity URLs are like global, right, for all domains, and that's not something that's so cool. So that's something that we want to do. Basically, if you have domains, you want to be able to split the whole resource resolution map in the domain first, and then you can do separate things there. So that's certainly one thing that it's already possible today, but not the way we ship it by default. Right? Then what you mentioned is, and that's actually something that most of the stuff actually got fixed, but there's I think still some tools that don't use the order. So the Sling initially had basically vanity URLs or other things that you can basically, and it's allowed to define the same path. So basically, we don't try to find out, oh, if this path already is configured somewhere else. We don't do any conflict resolution when it comes to domains. We just allow you to do anything, and sometimes you can actually configure like the same vanity URL 3 times, and the last person who did it wins. Now. That's that, and that's just basically just, you know, the way it's been implemented. There's obviously a question about changing this. What we added is that the ability to actually define an order, like explicitly define an order, and that sometimes makes sense if we want to kind of create some kinds of fallback rules, and that's more. I don't think it's a web content management use case. You will have, but it's more on the application layer. But say if you have this part of the application running, and it contains that URL, but if it's not running, you want to have, for some other reason, you want to have this URL falling back to another part of an application that might be able to take over in case that is not running. So basically, we actually using this in CQ. We use vanity URLs double or triple, in with an order in case this bundle is not here, actually this one takes over. So you can do these kind of things on resources. That's what created the order. The reason why, the fun part is we actually only created the order because it was always predictable in the sense of the last wins, so the order was always good. And then Sun, well, Oracle changed the way their hash algorithm works, and suddenly the order was not correct anymore, and everything was flying off. So actually, that's a funny story. It took us a while to figure out what the actual issue was.
Issue if you install 5.5 on Java 7, you get the wrong welcome screen, right?
Exactly the problem because Oracle changed the way they did the hash map, and it changed the order, and we were like, what?
Yeah,
so
I ran mostly into problems with when I.
So, but we introduced like explicit orders to fix this, just to make sure that this one's out of it. Yeah.
My issue was mostly when I have a dynamic part in the middle.
Yeah.
And have some parts. So I have a beginning and a middle part, and the first, middle, and the last part were dynamic. So then it was completely unpredictable. Sometimes this one wins because there is no longest one. The document says the longest one wins, but if you have a lot of wildcards, then you don't know.
Okay. That's a good discussion. You need to have this discussion with Karsten. So.
Yeah. What are the other side effects with the hash map change in GDK7 other than the welcome screen? Are there other side effects in CQ5.6?
No. We had a few. I think we had a few other spots that we were. It's basically just you're coding and it always works like that, and suddenly the underlying implementation. Although it's totally. I mean, if you look at the code, it's like how could we ever code it that way? But it's just because it was never an issue, you don't care, right? And then suddenly you have to care because it changed. No, I mean for Java 7 support we always had to do other stuff, but that's more on the OSGI level because OSGI basically overrides the class loader, the way class loader works, because we basically can load the Java class with the same name in the same virtual machine, which is by definition not possible according to the Java virtual machine, and that's what the OSGI enables you, and it allows you to load the same class name twice or multiple times in context of when it's been used. And so Felix overrides the class loader. And for each big Java version, you have to re-implement this because obviously Oracle is changing this too.
But that's not true. You could otherwise JBoss could never have redeployment of the EAR files. The classes is defined with class loader and full qualified class path. So if you have a new class loader, you can always load something.
Yeah. I mean,
the problem is interacting between. Yeah. Because if you invoke a method, the parameters are also subject to the class loader, and then you can run into conflicts. Or that it doesn't find a method or whatever. So, but this was since the beginning that way.
I mean, you probably know more than I do. What I know is we have to, each time there's a new Java version, huge hoo-ha going on because we have to kind of fix the class loader. So whatever it is, there's some stuff that we have to do to make it work. So Java 8 support, obviously a big topic again right now to make sure next year we're ready when Java 8 comes out. So yeah, I have to put resources aside for this, otherwise I won't get it. That's all I know.
You're telling me it's a lot of work.
Cool, so time to wrap up. It's already late, right? So, but thank you very much, Cedric, for the.